Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and really happy to see all the young people. I think we're all young, but some of us are younger than others. Really happy to see that. I actually remember when I gave a talk earlier this year for the Alaska World Affairs Council and in Anchorage, and we had the opportunity to engage students, high school students, and it was funny because I didn't do it this time, but I often hand out a little book, which is a Bitcoin white paper. I had a whole bunch of copies, and I handed them out to students and talked a lot about crypto and all this stuff. And at the very end, one of the students made a remark. I think she was talking to a friend or something, and she said something to the effect of, you know, oh, you should have been there. We met the guy who invented Bitcoin. So no, I'm not Satoshi Nakamoto, for the record. So I just want to make that clear. So what I would like to do is really pose a question, and maybe we can argue for it, but what are the implications of this question? Is data the new currency? At our table, we've been talking so much about data. Let's think about that. Is data the new currency? And what I'd like to do in just a few minutes is introduce or frame this question with this idea of there are different digital money formats. Talk about what's developing. Everyone is thinking a lot about crypto, but I'd like to say we need to open up our mind to other things. I'm going to really double click on China and China's central bank digital currency. Talk about the risk there from a national perspective and geopolitical perspective. Why data might be more influential, and then talk about what may be the alternative approaches to what we see happening in places like China when it comes to money. So, but first I'll start with this idea. So I'm going to use this term digital money, because once you're talking about crypto, digital currencies, but when you talk about digital currencies, it means different things to different people. Digital money, we can all admit, is not new. So let's think about this idea, right? Some of you use Zelle, you use PayPal, right? FinTech payments, mobile money, online banking, you could say, in a sense, loosely, is digital money, right? We've been doing digital transactions. But previously, what we have never had, even with all those in FinTech innovations, we've never had digital money, access to digital money of the central bank. Digital money has always been created by financial institutions, right? If you think about it. All of your bank accounts, right? When you transact, it's not that you're sending a true digital dollar to someone, right? What you really have is you have a relationship with that financial institution. So, you know, when you're sending a Zelle or Cash App, right? You have an obligation. Basically, that institution has a liability with you as their customer. And when you transact to someone else, or you know, they're just sending that liability to now the other customer. It's not that it's actual digital money. So the public has we've never been able to have direct digital access to our national currency, to our fiat currency, right? We have this very sort of decentralized system of payments where you have to go through these institutions to transact. What has happened in the past 10 years is that, yeah, Bitcoin came on the horizon. And without going into technical details about Bitcoin, just know that Bitcoin was not a currency revolution or not a currency innovation. Bitcoin was a data revolution or data innovation, right? And Bitcoin on the scene, sort of happening on the fringes, you know, now getting popular, waves of enthusiasm. When the price goes up, everybody's, you know, going into frenzy and thinking about Bitcoin. Then it goes down, subsides. So Bitcoin and crypto is doing its thing, but here's the thing. As this happened, as Bitcoin happened, and as a whole industry started to develop in the crypto space, new types of services, new types of ways of transferring value digitally, right, through crypto, the banking community, especially the central banks, did not just remain static, although maybe they did for several years. What's happening now is there's an exploration in, wow, maybe we can take some of the elements of cryptography that come with cryptocurrencies and blockchain, maybe we can use it, central bank, maybe we can create our own truly digital currency. So this would be something new that we've never had. Not a private financial institution creating a digital currency and facilitating the transaction, but the actual invention and creation of a central bank digital currency. So what do we have now? Now we have these different digital money formats. Your regular online banking, your mobile money, M-Pesa, which is in Kenya, that's like a form of digital money that you can use to transfer and pay people, right? Other fintech, the payments, Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, right? Another form or format of digital money, which is different, but it's still a way of transferring value. And just a little side note, footnote, without going into a Bitcoin explainer, people think, are you sending Bitcoin? When you think about it, remember, a blockchain protocol is just a ledger really of ownership, where the data can be shared and universally verified. So when you're dealing with cryptocurrencies, these permissionless cryptocurrencies, you're basically saying, okay, I'm going to tap into this ledger, and I'm going to, I'm going to buy into it, and I'm going to participate in, this ledger of ownership that gets authenticated, and I'm going to, confirm that my transaction went there, and now my ownership is less, and now I can see it in this wallet, right? That's an area that I want to play in. That's one format. What's happening with central bank digital currencies is there's this exploration that's happening. Several central banks reacting to the technological development of cryptocurrencies are now seeking an efficiency in their payment system. They're seeing like, wow, Bitcoin, you can send it across borders, there's no issue, right? You don't think about, like raise your hand here if you've ever sent a cross-border email before. Right? Everyone's hand should be raised because you don't worry about cross-border emails, right? But what about a cross-border payment, right? If you send a cross-border payment, right, you're going through an intermediary, right? But what crypto can do is, make in many ways a more efficient way to transfer value, to buy into that system. So central banks are seeking in many ways more efficient payments. They're seeking, some would say, better ways to increase access to finance by innovating with their payment system. And the one that I want to drill down on today, which central bank digital currency or CBDC I want to leave you with, is China's central bank digital currency. And some call it digital Yuan. They branded the system as the ECNY. I kind of use that because that's the term that they're using. But China's CBDC is the most aggressive of any large economy. It's not out, it's in a pilot stage, right? They're gradually putting it out. But the Chinese CBDC is a centralized digital currency, right? Their digital renminbi or their digital yuan, their central bank, the People's Bank of China, creates it. The banks and the payment firms are able to then have it, the central bank issues it to these payment firms, and then the users will go through the banks to get a wallet, and they will hold, and then they can send the digital yuan, right? So you have this system, though, where the central bank, though, still manages and creates the currency. Not like we talked about before, where the financial institutions create the digital money, right? This is the central bank movement. So we have here this piloting being done where China is saying, look, cash is on its way out. We need to create something that we're able to control more, have more insight into transactions that are happening. If you go to China, we were talking earlier about how in China the payments have been so advanced by the private sector. Alipay and WeChat, right, have sort of revolutionized payments in China and throughout much of Asia. But the thing is, what was happening all along when this fintech innovation was happening in China, the central bankers in China were looking at this and were saying, and we have the reports and articles where they've said this phenomenon of these private payments is too big to fail. So much of our economy is transacting through Alipay and WeChat. These private companies and these private platforms, we need to rein that in. So several years ago, 2014, 2016, they started researching the state-based digital currency, which now, 2021, 2022, is being revealed. So here's the thing, why is this different? Why is a central bank digital currency even a thing, even in authoritarian China? Some people would say nothing it doesn't really matter because the Chinese government already has authority over the private sector. So what's the big deal? I want to paint for you a picture. Here's a metaphor, or an analogy. It's like the difference between a bus and a trolley. A bus is kind of what we all have today in our payment system or our banking system. What is the bus? The bus, let's imagine the bus is how banks and payments work. The data and everything associated with the transaction goes onto the bus. What is the bus? The bus is the financial institution. And a bus goes from place to place, right? It delivers, let's just say it's delivering what's in the, what's in the bus. And for the government to get everything that's on the inside of that bus, the government has to go to the bus, stop it, bang on the door, provide a subpoena, depending on your country, or gun, but force the bank to open up and then look at all that data. That's the bus system. Essentially, that's how it works all around the world, whether authoritarian or free democratic society, the bus system. The trolley system is different. The trolley system is where, let's say, the vehicle is now, the financial institution is a trolley. And if you know what a trolley looks like, the data, if the passengers of the data will get onto the bus, but the trolley is connected to a larger system. It has those wires. Those wires go back to the central bank. So now, if I can sort of stretch this metaphor, when the government wants the data, it's not a question of just going to some independent, bus and opening up and forcing the data out. Now the data is already being stored. What's on the bus automatically goes into the system, and then it's accessible for analysis by the authority that is in charge of this entire system. So that's one way to think about what I think China's central bank digital currency is. It's a trolley system. And it's so funny, when I started working on this a couple years ago, my co-author and I, we actually wrote a paper last year about China's digital currency, and we were hitting hard, right? We're a national security think tank, so we're hitting hard. The subtitle of our report was adding financial data to China's digital authoritarianism. Like, we're hitting hard, basically saying this is going to empower digital authoritarianism, surveillance or state surveillance. It's interesting. In the past year, we've seen China's central bank make statements saying, well, no, we're gonna anonymize that data. We're not gonna make it so the central bank can willy-nilly, because that's what we were saying. I mean, based on the early sketches, the central bank can willy-nilly just look at the data. They've been saying that, well, no, we're not going to do that. We're gonna have laws, and only if it's a legal activity will we be able to get that information. So they're trying to sort of walk this back. But I'll give you another example of why this is a change, and I think the teenagers in the room will appreciate this. Again, if someone says, well, the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party already has access to data, and they already have all this control. Well, think about it if you're a teenager. Actually, no, let me say the parents in the room, parents of teenagers. So it's like the difference between if your teenager has a device and they live in your house, you have authority to check their device. I mean, you theoretically speaking, maybe it's not as easier said than done, but your parent, teenagers, right? Your parent can bang on the door and say, hey, I want to see what's on your device, or hey, give me your password. I need to check on you, right? That's kind of the system that maybe exists in China now. The person, the financial institution is like a teenager that has their devices, but the parent, the authority, can always come in and compel them, right? But what is being built is, teenagers, think about this. Let's say your parents were more technically savvy than they probably are. And let's say your parents had all of your devices linked up so that every keystroke you had was uploaded to a cloud, which they could control, and they could see everything that you were doing on your phone, on your computer, every chat. That would be a different situation than them coming with their authority, right? What'd you say?
I like it.
You like the parents are like, yes for parental authoritarianism, right? I mean, that's what we do. These are the different models, right? Authority having to go through you versus data just going to them. And then the thing is that data is going into, let's say, a cloud. Let's just say if it goes into a cloud, and then all of that data can be analyzed, at will. So this latter method it really fits into a broader strategy. It's really not about money. This strategy that we're seeing, and I'm using China as an example because it's the furthest ahead with this pilot for a big country. But this fits into a broader vision or strategy that the Chinese government has put out for a financial technology development plan, and a larger vision for how the digital economy needs to be facilitated. This idea that the digital economy is everything connected to the internet, and that payments should be connected with that, and all the data that comes from that needs to be analyzed. There should be big data so that the state, in China's case, can understand what's happening, the trends, etc., and can drill down for action based on that. There's this term, you often hear people saying data is the new oil. I'm more leaning towards the phrase data is the new electricity, especially in terms of what you see happening in a place like China. Why? Because the understanding is that data is now going to drive all of the applications, right? And that the economy is going to be based on data. So, like you need electricity to sort of power all of your devices and power everything that you have in your home and in your business, data is needed to power the decision making, to power the analysis. So data really is like electricity. But even if we use a different term, Chinese leadership has said data is like a factor of production. That's a quote. The idea that we see data as an input, right, that's going to be necessary for advancing the economy, especially the digital economy. Because what's the vision? The vision of the digital economy is everything is connected to the internet. So, what might be the impact of this type of development? And I'm speaking to you here, like giving you a big picture, but I want us to think about, how this could be used, especially for firms that are doing international business in China. In Washington, a lot of people ask the question, is China's digital currency going to enable greater sanctions evasion? When the US sanctions a country, then the banking system pretty much has to obey those sanctions. So if you want to do financial transactions and the US sanctions you, then you can't transact, right? You can't, and if you're a bank, you can't facilitate those transactions of a sanctioned actor. So some people are saying, will this allow China to sort of get around this system because they create an alternative? In the short term, my answer is no. I mean, just creating a new digital currency doesn't mean you've really created an alternative system. Plus, even the way the CBDCs, the way that they're being piloted, they're still using banks. So it's like the banks are some of the custodians of these CBDCs. So banks are still going to have pressure or feel pressure from the US because banks still want access to the dollar, and dollar markets. So there's still influence where right now, just because China created it doesn't mean that, sanctions are no longer going to work. But here's an example of what might be the short-term impact on a US company. Let's say a US company that's doing retail business in China. You have customers, you're operating, and this new ECNY system is put in place. How might this impact you as a company? Well, here's a real-life case that should make you think. Last year, there was a big controversy that happened because anyone ever shop at H&M clothing store? H&M, anyone have some H&M gear on them? Okay, H&M, okay. H&M is a Swedish company. And some time ago, a year or two ago, they had posted on their blog that they were concerned about their supply chain and that some of their cotton perhaps could have be sourced from forced labor from the Xinjiang region in China. And so they were sort of making a post about this, that they no longer want to do that. Well, word got around. Now this, of course, made the government in China upset, right? Because this is really a backhanded critique, even without saying, the government, it was a critique. And so that was not, that didn't make them happy. So what happened sometime last year? Last year, there was an effort to remove the digital footprint of H&M stores in China. And how did this show up? It showed up so that if you took your phone and called in Uber, the Chinese version of Uber, and went to the H&M store in Beijing, which is, they probably many of those. Once you would put in going to H&M, it would say, destination invalid. No H&M store. Now, the H&M store is still there. It's physically there, but for some reason, when you're trying to go, no. They're one of the biggest e-commerce sites, JD.com, I believe it is. All of a sudden, H&M clothing is no longer on that major site, which customers go to get to order online. And there were a series of these activities, basically, from the GPS system to remove H&M. Now, this was it wasn't even passive aggressive. It was a pretty aggressive thing to remove an H&M. Why? Because people were saying H&M is against China. H&M is against, it has wronged us. In that situation, the ECNY, the digital yuan, was not really a part of it, right? This was last year. H&M, the digital currency was not involved. But when I saw this, I said, this points to a clue as to what would happen if the Chinese CBDC was up and running. Because you can imagine that if H&M had wallets or was taking payments in CBDC, this new trolley system, it would be much easier to then, over here, the central bank, turn off the switch of payments to H&M wallets, until you comply. You can basically say, post an apology. Any of you that are basketball fans, right? The NBA, you can imagine a scenario where some NBA player or manager tweets, free Hong Kong or something, just on his own. And then word gets around and the government says, NBA, until you issue an apology and you reverse your statements, there will no longer be NBA tickets that can work. There will no longer, the wallets that accept money for NBA tickets in China, because the NBA is huge in China, will no longer work. So please change. I call this economic retaliation, right? Some people might say, it's just sanctions in reverse. It's the same sort of thing that the U.S. does. The U.S. uses its economic power and coercion to get its way. Okay, maybe you can argue that, right? We're on the geopolitical stage, right? Yeah, everything goes maybe. But the question is, how does this shift things, right? If as a business if you bought into the system, you have to understand that this system can be more easily influenced by the central government. So that is a clue as to what could be possible with a CBDC in an authoritarian country, right? Turning off your payments with the flip of a switch. Now, long term, I'm painting a very sort of maybe a scary or picture, but it's not to say that this is going to be automatic, that this is going to be how things end. I mean, the long-term success of the ECNY, it's going to depend on a lot of domestic factors. It's going to also depend on how other countries buy into it or not. When I describe for you this whole bus and versus trolley system and all these examples, it's because the focus has been on the retail, the domestic side, right? The ECNY is really a domestic payment system. But now let's talk about international, right? Not just an international company that's doing business in China, in their domestic environment, but what about long term? What happens with international payments? There are two streams of research happening. There's the retail payment, and there's another thing which is happening on the world stage, which is piloting and experimenting with alternative CBDC to CBDC payment systems. Now, what does that mean? And this is not just China. There's, many central banks are now thinking about creating their own CBDCs. They're doing research, and there's this sort of effort that's happening sort of in the sidelines, which is, okay, so since we're experimenting on CBDCs, why don't we also consider a world where when we want to do trade with each other as countries, we don't, hey, that banking system, which is decentralized, takes long for payments to go through, that's the old system. Let's experiment, let's pilot a new system where when we do trade, basically you have your CBDC and it goes to a different platform, it comes to me, I'm not gonna have your dollar or your digital money, I'll have my own because there's like an exchange system, CBDC to CBDC. Now let's use this so now when we have trade, we just directly use this platform, which is maybe really just a software platform. It doesn't involve all these different banks which now manage international payments. Right now, this is being piloted, very small like proof of concepts, right? China is doing one which is involved with, I think it's Thailand, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, maybe Singapore, I'm forgetting. But 3 or 4, Hong Kong, 3 or 4 jurisdictions are piloting it. So, what is the implication?
Does that take into account different currency values?
Yeah. So I think, so what they're trying to do, so it's funny, they're actually, sometime this month or next month, the Bank for International Settlements, which is actually an institution that I'm learning more about, all these institutions you've never heard of, is sponsoring this pilot. They've been running it for the past couple of years, and they recently did a proof of concept where they put real money and facilitated these transactions, sort of as a trial. Now, how exactly it works, it's not clear. They said they're going to reveal like the working paper to explain it all. But the idea is that the foreign exchange happens through this platform, not through traditional foreign exchange FX markets, right? Now, I'm not an expert in foreign exchange. I mean, that's like a whole niche. But the idea, though, is that let's try this alternative way of doing international trade. So if that happens, so if an alternative system develops, especially one where the United States is not really, right, the United States isn't part of any of these pilots. The United States is over here, still studying, thinking about a central bank digital currency, right? And I'm not here to tell you whether the US should or should not create its own CBDC. I'm just saying that this is what's happening. And this is not, don't take this as like, oh, it's just something that China's doing, or that it's only an issue of US adversaries, political adversaries, because Russia has also been working on its digital ruble, and that's in train right now. And they probably had more impetus to do it now, given what's happened in the past year. They're also launching their own digital currency. But guess what? Other countries are exploring it too. Bank of England is exploring, although there's debate whether or not it's necessary. But within the central bank itself, they're looking at it. High-level friendly nations have said, hey, it actually makes sense, like to build a world where everyone doesn't have to be dependent on the US dollar. I mean, right? I mean, for other countries, that just makes sense. So this is all happening where you can see, maybe there should be an alternative system that is not dominated by the US. And I'm a former intelligence analyst. I worked for the CIA, as was mentioned. And one of the things that always, one of the things that you have to think about if you're a CIA analyst is not how things are right now, what's going on, but what is on the horizon, what is developing. Even if you think a situation is unlikely to happen in the near future, you do have to forecast what would be the things that you would see, what would be the indicators of enabling the worst case scenario to happen, or some low probability scenario to happen, right? That's kind of how you're thinking. And when I do that, I'm not saying that the CBDC is going to, China's CBDC is going to take over, or that this alternative system is going to be successful, and the US dollar, the US is going to lose out. But what I do point out is that, okay, if we were to see that, here are the signs of what you would see. You would see governments experimenting, central banks, you would see a growing effort, research pouring into it. Now, will that align with an alternative system that the US has cut out of? Depends on maybe on other factors, like what is the US going to do? Is the US going to participate? And what does that look like? That's a whole other conversation maybe we could have afterwards, because I'll leave you with this, this question of, what does the new economy, the digital economy what should it look like? How should payments be with all these technological advancements? What's possible? And I'll round up with a few, what I would say, implications for you to put in your pocket to think about of, let's say, China's CBDC. One is clear, which is the digital authoritarianism we've already talked about. But the other is one question of competition. At our table, we were talking about, here over lunch, we were talking about, well, data. What is the influence of data, and could data help competition? If the Chinese digital currency is, one, providing more data to the government is, now has data that it can use to maybe help. So it's looking at the transactions of foreign companies in the country, and it can gain insights. When do they have the best sales? What's their supply chain like? How often are they paying? Whatever data they could collect. And then they could maybe use that for their sector, for their domestic sector. There's also the idea of there's a lot of research going into blockchain technology, which I didn't mention that this CBDC is not a blockchain-based. It's going to support elements of blockchain, but it's a centralized currency. But they are building programmability, at least on the top layer, where they want innovation because they want the money to be programmable, the ECNY to be programmable. So another question we should think about is the ability to program transactions, make up, to program code, so now you can do transactions in the future based on certain characteristics. The fact that if you have this programmable money, you could do micropayments. Because if we want to do a transaction right now, if I want to set up with this table and I want to send each of them 0.0005 cents, that's impossible with our current banking system, right? There's no way for me to do that. I can't go online and send anybody 0.5 cent, right? I can't do that. But thinking about what Bitcoin did, you can do that when your currency is truly digital, and you can program, okay, yeah, I want to make a program, write a program, and it's going to give each individual, each wallet, 0.005 dollars or cents every 5 minutes or every month, right? There's a lot that can come from that. Will that spur innovation if that's happening, whether it's China or elsewhere, and the United States system is still a little sluggish? Like, we can't do that. Obviously, our economic heft is still there, but long term, is our economy losing out because we're not taking these steps? So China is prioritizing a smarter economy, smarter money, and I leave you with this thought. We know that there was a world centuries ago where having gold was sort of key to the strength of your economy and your economic, your geopolitical power, right? How much gold you had. There was an age of that. And then we know that we transferred to an era where really having dollars was key to what your economy could do, right? Because of the value of the dollar after World War II. Are we moving to an era where your ability to leverage and to use data, and again, what type of data, right? Maybe the data that comes from transactions and your ability to leverage the data that's within your economy is a strategic advantage. And does data provide some sort of edge for competition, for economic prowess, for your digital economy as the economy is getting more digital? And in essence, there's more data because there's more data around. So that is maybe the somber note, but we gotta maybe end on an optimistic note, right? I don't want to leave you with, and it's a question, right? If we see data becoming so important, if we in the US are going to be focused on data and finance, what is going to be our strength? How are we going to have a strategic advantage? And I would say let's go back to our roots. Our strength, I would say, is within our Constitution. Our strength, the Fourth Amendment, right? Protecting against unlawful seizure, search and seizure, right? Is the bedrock of our cultural and political life. How can we mesh or merge or infuse that right that our Constitution has with what we're seeing with data, right? It's a policy question that has to be worked out, a legal question, and it's also a technological question. Can we use technology to support the Fourth Amendment so that our data, which would be our papers, that the Constitution talks about, that the Fourth Amendment talks about, the ability that the government can't just take your papers and do what it wants? Can we use technology to enforce that protection while we still leverage data? And maybe as complex as payments are getting, maybe we need to think about a new term, which isn't really popular yet, which is digital financial privacy. We talk a lot about data privacy, right? And so this is maybe just a subset of it, because I think digital financial privacy goes a little bit deeper into, it's not just your data, but it's everything around your financial transactions and the patterns within those transactions. I guess someone would say, well, maybe that ship has left because we know that somebody has all of our data. But, it's not the government. So I would say the Constitution is our strength. There's budding technology that's out there that's trying to solve this privacy issue. to alleviate the tension between security and privacy, but it's not mature. So for those who are thinking about, well, careers to go into, policy questions, whether it's legal, if those of you who are aspiring lawyers, those of you who are aspiring technologists, I think the issue of privacy, if you're going into law, I'll say, and I've told this to many interns over the years, if you're going into law, I can imagine that there's going to be a thirst for anyone who understands the computer science world, digital technology, blockchain technology, because smart contracts, which is a term people throw out, which is a blockchain, a written code contract about a transaction, how does that mesh with actual law, physical law, right? Lawyers sometimes come to crypto experts and they're like, hey, there are all these new tax questions, all these new legal questions and contract questions. I don't understand blockchain. So if you're thinking about law, you should be thinking about what's happening with technology. Maybe you need to be an expert in some of this to help our legal practice and legal system. And then the future of the internet itself is something that needs principles. And China and other countries are trying to put out standards. In fact, the Central Bank of China actually said, yeah, we need to have CBDC standards. Well, standards have to be based on certain principles. Our founders looked at the history of the world, go back to 1776. They saw the abuses of a powerful state, right? That was embedded in how the Declaration of Independence was drafted and how the Constitution developed. And they saw that the abuses of a powerful state, right, could constrain liberty. And so, can the abuses of the powerful state be emboldened with digital power, with data power? This is something that our society needs to reckon with, needs to understand. So if anything from this talk, if I could at least leave you with, the fascinating thing is we're on the cusp of some fascinating times, of changing times, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to figure out what should the digital economy look like and what can we do to ensure that it is a system for good. So I think I will end there, and I really welcome our conversation and questions.
And thank you. No, you stay up here with me because we're going to, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm Mike Hawley and I'm on the board of the World Affairs Council. We're not going to have time for the multiple questions that you all have, but I'll tell you what we will do. We've got two schools with us. I told them in advance. Brian Harrison, I told, Brian, by the way, is one of our council scholars, one of the teachers that we send abroad. Where did you go, Brian? Portugal, beautiful. So we're going to hear from Hickory Ridge real quick, the question, also from Providence Day, a question from them, and then while they're asking their questions, be thinking about what you told your son, who went to college at 16, just graduated at 20 and got his first job. What did you stress for him as far as what he should take from his education? What should that process be like? Because we had both students as well as parents and grandparents and uncles and aunts who advise folks. So, Brian?
Thank you.
Thanks, Felicia.
If we do go cash free, what would happen to all those who don't have access to any digital forms of cash, or those who live in rural areas?
Yeah.
Okay, so a rural area question, Providence Day.
Hi, I'm Pete, not the software Providence Day. I wanted to ask you mentioned, and I think you kind of like touched on like unbreakable locks and the ethics of, hypothetically, if there was something that could save lives, are like lock behind unbreakable lock, a digital unbreakable lock is like ethically, is it better to be protected from the government or to have the information be able to be accessed?
Okay, yeah, so how about see if you can answer those and tell us a little bit about your son, and then we're going to get Vaj up here to close it out. And if you've got questions, I'll hang around a little bit afterwards.
Great. So the cashless issue is a societal question that I think every society has to answer, and the concern obviously is very valid, right? Because everyone if we go, I mean, your question, if we go cashless, well, what about people who can't access these other tools or institutions or payment systems? There are a few different answers and ways to think about it. One is, maybe we should never go cashless. That's number one. I think that's a cultural, societal question, which may be hard. I mean, in the US it's easier because compared to other countries, we actually use cash a lot. I mean, compared to Sweden, compared to China. And who's to say, I'm one for saying that, yeah, we don't have to just follow the trends, right? I think it's in our DNA. We don't have to go cashless. You know, we do a lot of things in the US that, you know, every other country doesn't do. Maybe we need to keep physical cash as a way of at least allowing for another method of value transfer, just because, you know, so there's no one to say, I don't think we should necessarily go cashless. Now, for those societies that are going cashless and have sort of said, even China's walking back. I mean, I remember reading years ago Chinese officials saying they expected cash would disappear. Now I'm hearing less of that. I think, you know, whether it's true or not, I think, you know, they're not saying that cash is going to be outlawed or anything, but I think there's a sense that, you know, cash is definitely draining, is diminishing. Cash use is diminishing. But what some central bankers are thinking is that, well, this CBDC should be made in a way where you can sort of lower the barriers so that more people can access it. That's one thing they say. And then you should build into the technology so that rural communities, so it can be used in rural communities without an internet connection. So even in the Chinese pilot, they have wearable, they have hardware and software wallets. They do have the ability to have some transactions where you don't need access to the internet. So you can be in a place without power, you can be on, underneath, with no Wi-Fi, etc., and you can transact using their pilot digital currency. The idea is that I think they're saying they're sensitive to that, and I mean that's a lesson for I think any country that creates a digital currency. You should build in accessibility so that it's not just people with smartphones, etc., people with internet connections. That should go into the design. So that's something that people are thinking about.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
So that question, I know it was a long answer, but I mean, the privacy, the security versus privacy, which is stronger because you get different answers. I'm not sure if I could give you something definitive. I think I have to kind of, go down the middle because when law enforcement sees that a crime has been committed, right? Let's take a real example. Let's take that years ago, you remember the San Bernardino terrorist attack. This was two ISIS-inspired folks or ISIS folks in California who did an attack, killed multiple people. And this controversy came up because I think they had their phone and Apple wouldn't release the information, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, law enforcement wants to crack the code. Law enforcement wants to get that information. And again, that's one example. We can think, without getting into detail, right? But there are lots of heinous crimes that many of us would be like, hey, that crime is so bad, we need to do whatever we can to get that information, right? That exists. But here's the one thing I'll say, even about that ISIS attack. The phone was, at least for a while, was sort of the black box, right? Law enforcement wanted to get into it. But when you put all the data points together, there was only I think they said it was like only a minute, 13 minutes in their spree and them fleeing. There was only 13 minutes that was unaccounted for. Because why? They had so much footage from closed circuit TV. They had so much from phones stuff. The law enforcement had so much data, and there was a little bit that was inaccessible. Of course, they were trying to get more with the phone. The end of the story is that on net, we have more data, right? We have more data than we've ever had. So if you look at it from that perspective, you could say, really, yeah, we're probably going to have some areas that are going to be hard to get, but for the functioning of a healthy society, and I'll quote the former CIA director and former NSA director, who, when this controversy came out, he basically said, yes, he understands the issue, but on net, our society is better off with strong encryption in general on net. That's understanding, all sides of the issue.
Well, let's get Raj Bharadwaj up here. He's with Truist Bank, and he's the chair of the World Affairs Council, and he's going to close it out. And while he's coming up, tell us what you told your son.
So, I mean, I told my son many things, and hopefully he listened to some of them. I think what I'll say is, you know, it's funny because my son followed his heart. It's funny, people think I influenced him. He majored in economics and finance, and he had an opportunity to go two routes. This is an interesting personal aside for you all. So we're real thankful that he went through school, got good grades, and at the end of college, he had the opportunity to go the fintech crypto route in terms of his job search, and the Fed route, the Federal Reserve, right? Those are like old money and new money, right? Or new money and old money, if I can use that term, right? Two different systems. And he chose, I think what we said to him was, you know, we wanted him to approach his career where he was open to what is new, but he should be grounded, right, in what has gone before. And he decided to go to the Fed, with the understanding that, you know, in the future he can also adapt and go into crypto in that area. So that's what I would say. Understand the foundation of others who've come before you, the foundation of our institutions, while you are learning how to adapt and build onto our economy. Great.